Good afternoon and welcome to today's work session, this October 25th, 2022. During this work session, we will receive a presentation from our DOT Director, Drew Ressler, regarding the 2024 Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax Ballot Referendum. With that, Drew, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here this afternoon. Part of a continued conversation, and I'll just note I appreciate all of y'all's time. We've met individually to talk about this. A lot of what's included in here is what we heard from you all. Of course, this has been a long conversation, and I'm reminded that nothing that is worth doing comes quickly. And so I appreciate all of the work that the board has put into this thus far, and we look forward to continuing the conversation this morning. The presentation that we have today really breaks down into three main sections. The first section being the most important of just what we heard from you all as we had our individual conversations about the transportation future in Cobb County. And then secondly, we break the conversation into a planning framework that we can pull into the next stages of planning for a referendum. And then finally, mixed in with that planning framework is opportunity. So we present some specific projects through here. Those projects are not meant to be exhaustive of what a referendum list would include, but just to demonstrate what kinds of projects that we've discussed. And in the past and through the CTP, we've shown some of these projects, but they've been lines on pages, and we haven't really talked about what that means for the community and what the end user would see from that. Before we really even get into what we heard, I did want to talk about Cobb's projected growth. Between now and 2050, over the next 30 years, we anticipate population increase by 30%, employment to increase by 40%. Now, those numbers can be difficult to wrap our mind around what a 30% increase or a 40% increase in employment and population, which we would anticipate to come into our driving network and our roadway network. But what does that look like? To help illustrate that, during the summer months, we find that traffic tails off about 10%. We've all done this where we've driven around. School has just let out, and we're thinking, man, this is great. We can get around much easier, much more quickly. So if we think about the growth anticipated in Cobb as the reverse times 3 of employment and population increasing by 30 and 40%, and just what demands that may have on our transportation network. To go into a little bit further, not only is Cobb growing, but the region is growing as well. The population in Cobb is anticipated to go from about 750,000, 760,000 people to 1 million. So an increase of about 300,000 in population. If we combine the growth of Paulding, Cherokee, and Bartow, they will also add 300,000 in population. And just to demonstrate some of the county's growth expected per ARC, Paulding County is expected to grow by 68% in population, Cherokee County by 60%, Bartow County by 56%, Douglas County by 38%. And that growth is largely in population, more so than in net jobs. So we do anticipate much of that traffic to be then coming through and either to or through Cobb County for that daily traffic to get to work. And then more specifically about our roadway level of service. This map is a little bit difficult to show, but it is looking at the VC ratio, which is just the volume compared to the capacity. And when we talk about roads being at capacity, what that means is that the volume meets whatever the capacity demands are. It meets or exceeds those capacity demands. So anything at 1 and beyond is at or above capacity, and that's at which point delays begin to expand exponentially, because there's no more vehicles that we can put into the system. And then that turns into much longer peak hours and cascading delays throughout the rest of the system. And what we anticipate over the next 30 years is that the number of arterials that are at a level of service F, so failing at capacity, would double and be 10% of our overall system if we do nothing. If we go down and look at level of service, E or F, and level of service is, again, just a measure of congestion from A to F. If we look at those arterials that are either an E or an F, again, if we do nothing, 1/4 of all of our arterials will fall into that failing or nearly failing category. So then the conversation turns to, well, what do we do? And that's really where we begin to pick up the conversations that we had with you all in these areas of needed investment. And this comes from the conversations that we have. The darker blue at the top are those areas where we heard broad consensus across the board, and then coming down into a little bit less and a little bit less, but nevertheless, all of these areas having support of at least more than one commissioner. And those top 4 really stand out. Regional transit connectivity, some of those projects are already underway, but connecting the broader region, not just internal to Cobb, but connecting Cobb to and through the Metro Atlanta region, utilizing technology that exists now and into the future to make sure that we are maximizing the effectiveness, safety, and efficiency of our transportation systems, continuing to improve intersections, both for safety and operational benefits, as well as traffic calming being one that we've heard. So the broad spectrum of transportation really coming out in those conversations with particular emphasis on transit. There we go. Some of the recurring topics, if we look at this now more geographically, cross-county access, and I would say capture inter-county access as well, looking at those commuters that are coming through Cobb to the north and the west particularly, and then either into or through Cobb towards Atlanta, easing congestion, multimodal connectivity throughout the region, and this would include access points of not just the activity centers within Cobb, but also those outside of Cobb that would be Midtown and the airport and the various amenities that are across the river into Atlanta. Easy access to those activity centers, again, county to county, inter-county connectivity, and the like. And this is where we heard consensus for projects that are already in the works, like the regional connections on the 285 Express Lane Transit that will connect transit from 20 to 20 as part of GDOT's 285 project, addressing congestion, limiting and mitigating the impacts of freight so that we can continue the economic benefits of freight while also minimizing those impacts on neighborhoods, and then overall increasing livability. So with this information that we heard from the board, we could really break those into 3 separate areas that are distinct, that are amodal, but can serve as 3 planning categories for us. The first one is, again, beginning with the people and serving the community. So our first category, serving the community. Again, Cobb is home to more than 750,000 residents. So before it's a center for employment or entertainment and all of the great services provided by the county and the cities and all of this, everything in between, every district and every city and every corner of our county is home to someone. And so the core question is, how can transportation make home better? And that's through options like micromobility. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. Traffic calming, overall safety, walkable residential centers, again, that improve the livability of homes. So serving the community being that first planning category. Second planning category, mobility within activity centers. So while we have residents in all corners, we have centralized jobs, entertainment, shopping in the many activity centers throughout the county. This shows some of those top activity centers. There are other industrial centers throughout and into South Cobb that would qualify for this as well. But looking at those activity centers, how can we move within those activity centers? And again, this is to make them accessible, walkable, bikeable, well-lit. How can we address parking demands as we have areas like KSU that continue to have increased growth, but are not keeping up with that growth in terms of parking all of those additional students? And then how can we move around those activity centers without necessarily having to drive a walkable trip? And then finally, our third category, connectivity to activity centers. So improving the lives of residents, mobility within the activity centers, and then connecting residents to those activity centers, and being able to provide options that are time-effective and competitive travel modes, of course, always including safety at the top of the list and utilizing technology. So if we break those down further, and beginning with mobility within activity centers, we've talked about some of the opportunity, but really wanted to start with an example. This is one of the many activity centers or areas that have activity centers throughout the county. This example could be used in many other corners of our community, but I think it serves as a good example because we have, of course, Town Center and all that that is for jobs and employment and residents, as well as the airport and Kennesaw State University, one of the largest universities in all of the state of Georgia, all in that same area. And then these three projects really work in tandem to make sure that these activity centers can continue to be successful. On the left, and we can fix that arrow is in the process of being studied, but we have the connection improving McCollum and Kennesaw Due West, the weave that we have there, and improving, which improves freight as well as vehicular access to and from East Cobb. The green, we have an extension of the Noonday Creek Trail. Noonday Creek Trail is one of our most successful facilities throughout the county and connecting the mountain all the way up to eventually the city of Woodstock, and being able to connect through here and add connectivity for that trail into the activity centers to continue to activate those. And then in purple is a high-capacity transit route. So imagine connecting the university, connecting Town Center, the jobs, all the redevelopment that's planned through there into the spine of the county, which is Cobb Parkway. It includes 4 of our 6 cities, all three of our CIDs, Dobbins and the like, being able to connect that through a high-capacity transit facility. And really, the point of this graphic is, again, not to suggest this is a final referendum list, but really to just demonstrate that all three need to be part of our transportation future to make sure that we're continuing to build on the success that we have throughout the county. Connectivity to activity centers. So we spoke about connectivity within activity centers. This is connecting to there and providing easy access, serving the residents in a safe and meaningful and effective way, improving and defining the freight connections, improving east-west connectivity was one that we heard a lot of, and then just overall corridor improvements and multimodal connectivity. Overall, what we're seeing, and we see this more and more as we have congestion, and a small example is the work that's being done on 285 that's increasing that congestion on 285. And what we're seeing is, as a region, is if we don't do something to address just the status quo, that we will grow more and more isolated in terms of not being able to get to the broader region. And so how can transportation serve to get to the airport, to get to Midtown, to connect through to North Fulton, to connect over to H.E. Holmes, and again, providing competitive options. We're blessed in this county to have access to 4 different interstates. And with that, there have been improvements to those, and the express lanes have been a fantastic example of that and have been truly transformational in terms of being able to get around to and through the county. But that additional capacity will only take so far. Each lane carries in the order of magnitude about 2,000 vehicles per hour. And so as we have increased demand on that system, as we have increased development pressure at the north ends of that system, what happens when all of that additional capacity is gone, and how can we continue to capitalize on that and do things like the 285 Express Lane Transit Project? Connecting to activity centers means east-west across the county to North Fulton, and looking at areas like Powder Springs, Austell, West Cobb, and even beyond our borders in Douglas and Paulding into areas that are isolated from interstate access and take a good bit of time to connect to the broader region. This shows our existing transit system. As you know, it is largely bus-based. And while it does connect many of our activity centers, if we check the box on where it goes and look at the orange dots compared to the green lines, there's a lot of similarity there. However, the frequency is low to meet the demand and the growth, and then the reliability during peak hours, because they are traveling in general lanes, is challenging. And what that opportunity could look like, again, not suggesting this is a final referendum list, but just what that opportunity is, in being able to go from 24% of the residents, 42% of the workers that have access to transit, walkable, easy access to transit, to 71 and 77% of workers, with a third of those workers walkable to a quarter mile, within a quarter mile of high-capacity transit. To demonstrate this a little bit further, we've spoken about this project. I think it is monumental in the region for what is happening in the partnership between Cobb, Fulton, City of Atlanta, Gwinnett, MARTA, and others is just connecting between Cumberland and Perimeter. So right now, in order to connect between those, the transit access is very clunky. You've got to get on a bus to go from Cumberland all the way down to Arts Center and then take a train all the way back up to Perimeter. It takes a good bit of time. In a personal vehicle, you might be able to do it in 18 minutes, maybe. It might take you 45 minutes, depending on what time of day, if there's been a crash. Very, very unreliable. And so you end up in a situation just connecting between these two major business centers in Metro Atlanta, where do you leave an hour beforehand and count on traffic happening, and then maybe you get there 45 minutes early? Or do you chance it and maybe get there pretty late? Again, even though that these are both areas that are very multimodal and do have very walkable systems, but just are not connected very well. And then into the future, when we look at the top end BRT and what that will provide is a 15-minute reliable trip. So at 6 in the morning, at noon, at 6 at night, you know between these two connections, these two nodes, that it's going to take 15 minutes. So what can that look like throughout the rest of the county? Again, just showing a couple of the connections from South Cobb up to Marietta, Marietta up to Kennesaw and Kennesaw State Town Center, that area. Right now in a personal vehicle, that takes up to 55 minutes, depending, again, time of day, crashes, and the like. On high-capacity transit, as an estimate, that estimate is 50 minutes. So again, we're showing a connection between that is competitive with personal vehicles. As we refine that further and get into the analysis, what it can show and just some of the details here of connecting between Marietta and Kennesaw, that can be done in 20 minutes. Connecting between South Cobb and Marietta can be done in 25 minutes. As the analysis fleshes out, that may be even more so. But again, what this demonstrates is that we can build out a transit system that provides competitive times with driving a vehicle and avoiding much of the hassles that come with trying to park. Now, we've spoken about BRT, so I did want to include in here what that could look like. This is just a rendering of Austell Road and what a system would look like, just so we begin to see that a BRT corridor, and again, we look forward to continuing to analyze this to determine if BRT is the best solution, but should it be, a BRT is much more than dedicated lanes for buses. It is a complete reimagining of a corridor to turn that corridor into something that is very walkable, very livable, very safe for pedestrians to cross. Includes much of the technology on those bus stops of level boarding and expected time to the next vehicle that have a lot of the look and feel of light rail. It's fine. We started with the people. I did want to end with the people. So ultimately, the transportation system, from what we heard and what we've looked at, needs to serve the community. And what exactly does that mean? Obviously, being able to have safety and efficiency and all that the system is, but more than that, allowing folks to age in place, to mitigate trucks on residential roads, to provide equitable mobility, suburban safety, traffic calming, and beautification throughout the community. I mentioned aging in place and the existing older population. If we look region-wide at some of the data coming out of ARC, the population of 75 plus, that is 75 plus, is expected to triple over the coming years, from 4% of the region population to 12%. So it's a pretty significant increase. Just on gross numbers, that's an increase of 350%. While much of the older population is being housed in some of the new development, it's not going to meet the demand of this aging population. And in a lot of cases, someone that would like to stay in their own home is unable to because transportation becomes a problem. Once someone is no longer able to drive for themselves, it's a question of, okay, well, what's next? And a couple examples, one on the walking side and one on the more micromobility side that we'll get to in just a moment. But if we look at the area of Powder Springs and County Services, where the senior center is, there's a library, there's a lot of services, there's the health center, all within a very walkable distance. But many of those areas are not currently served by trails and sidewalks throughout. A lot of that is planned, and look forward to completing that. I will come back to that just while I'm speaking about, I'll go a little bit out of order, while I'm speaking about aging in place. I do want to skip over to this example as well. And this shows just an example of someone that lives in Powder Springs that wants to get over to the hospital. Right now on Uber, that trip could take in excess of $50. And that's before they've paid for their doctor. That's before all of the increasing costs of healthcare. And the reason for that being that much of the Uber and Lyft is going to be serving the areas around the Battery or to the airport, things like that. And it's just an expensive trip. So are we able to step into the gap and provide a service that is a public service, that isn't necessarily an A to B, door-to-door type service, but can serve the community in areas where there is not the density for something maybe a little bit more frequent, and provide the opportunity for individuals to continue to age in place. Additionally, when we think about serving the community, it's providing a transportation system overall that is safe and efficient. This is an example of an intersection that, as we've had increased demands on paving and drainage and just basic infrastructure maintenance, our ability to do safety and operational improvements like this is Burnt Hickory, Gordon Combs, and Bob Cox, has diminished. So intersections like this, and we could name intersections in each of the districts, and I'm sure the cities could as well within the cities, our ability to be able to fund and take care of things like that has become challenged. Moving into transit, what transit could provide in terms of opportunity, just if we look at broad percentages, again, more so than the map is, households in poverty or those without a vehicle or older adults, we're able to move from, in cases, 18 to 50% of populations into between 70 and 80% of populations by providing a very connected transportation system. We did mention this particular example, and with that, again, I just want to recap a little in terms of this presentation of being, again, just showing some of the examples of the projects that are possible within the planning framework of serving the community, providing access to activity centers, and then providing mobility and access within activity centers. And I would suggest that as a planning framework for a referendum. And but at this point, I do want to pause and take any comments and questions that you may have.
Thank you, Drew, for that presentation and for all the work that you've done leading up to this presentation and speaking with all the commissioners and stakeholders. I'm fortunate that we have some significant stakeholders in our audience today who I'd like to recognize. We have Mayor Thurman with Powder Springs, who's with us, Mayor Norton of Smyrna, and also Mayor Clemens of Austell. Thank you for coming to today's work session. I also wanted to recognize Matt Stegall, who's on our Transit Advisory Board. Thank you for being here today. I'm sorry, who else is here? Our city manager, I believe, from Kennesaw is here. That's what I've heard, but I don't see. Oh, you're behind Jessica. Hello, good to see you, and thank you for being here today. I'm sure that the board has questions or comments, but in the interest of time, I wanted to give the mayors opportunity to speak, as I know one of them is on a tight schedule for today. And I know that our board was interested in hearing from our mayors at the last time we had a work session. So any of you are willing or able, please feel free to address the board with any of your observations or interest at this time.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank y'all for being here too. I just want to say, this is, we've talked about this from the get-go. This is a heavy lift and a big deal, and so we are, as all the mayors collectively, are very interested in having specific meetings to develop specific project lists. We got to get, just like the 6-year SPLOST, we have to get folks excited. We have to have things in line to get people enthusiastically supporting what we do, and that's going to take, getting down granularly to what does this mean for Powder Springs, Austell, Smyrna. Smyrna is geographically situated where transit, in a lot of ways, makes sense, but getting out farther into the county, I think we got to make sure that we have projects, and whether it's from the trail system to larger infrastructure projects that are very clearly defined, and the timeline is somewhat clearly defined on the early end of the results to get people excited. So we're looking forward, from Smyrna's perspective, I can speak for, to meeting with the chair and the rest of the commission to develop and bring forward some ideas that we have from our cities, what that might look like, and just appreciate the opportunity to be part of this process.
Thank you, Mayor
Thank
Norton.
you.
Appreciate it. Again, it's atypical during our work session that we'll have members of the audience speak, but I know, again, our mayors have been involved in having discussions with the board and DOT. Again, this is an opportunity to share, and if no one else desires to come up, I will turn things over to our commissioners to see if any of you have any comments or questions for Drew as he's seeking a path forward.
I have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Sheffield.
Drew, in reviewing the slide, connectivity to activity centers, well, there's several of the maps in here, and I wanted to know if there has been any opportunity or discussion around connecting Powder Springs to Paulding County, particularly Hiram, because there is an activity center right on the other side of the border.
Absolutely, and that was one of the areas. So in the interest of time, I did summarize a lot of what we heard into general themes, but that is an area that we've heard a lot about, particularly that Route 6 corridor that goes through Powder Springs and Austell, and then eventually up into some of the residential centers and activity centers within Paulding County, and fits right in with a lot of the discussion that we had about that inter-county access and providing a transportation system that moves the region forward overall.
Okay. And also connecting Powder Springs to Dallas Highway. I don't see a connection here.
And that's and there were a number of different maps, but absolutely connecting Powder Springs. Do you mean Powder Springs Road or City of Powder Springs?
Powder Springs Road, or even the city of Powder Springs, so that there is no gap between, I guess, where this is indicated in downtown Powder Springs to travel along Dallas Highway.
And what we provide in here, and I can jump to that slide, what we provide in here are just just large sweeping connections throughout. What we would look for is within that planning framework, particularly here, connectivity to activity centers is working with the community, working with you all, working with the cities for what that looks like.
Okay.
In terms of what mode works, what corridors work, how we flesh out those specific projects. I will highlight that area in particular, particularly the western end and even into Paulding County, if we think about the region overall, it's a pretty good hike to get either all the way south to Interstate 20 or all the way east to 285 and 75. So I do think particular emphasis on Austell, Powder Springs, and then the area of unincorporated sweeping up to the south and the north of those areas make a lot of sense because of the just being isolated from the broader
Right.
region.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, and piggybacking off of that, there are a couple of other slides similar to this one that show movement on I-75 or from East Cobb to neighboring Fulton County, and wanted to also add the link between Douglas County and this area, because I don't see a dotted line on I-20, but those have been active conversations.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, are there any other commissioners? Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you. I was just going to say this, I really appreciate this presentation, and I think it gives the right kind of context to start looking at what specific projects can meet the needs. But I would say a lot of the things are covered. I think we'd want to take one more look at the comprehensive plan for where some of that future growth might be, what we might be seeing, that future growth and future activity centers, to get those as well on here. But all in all, this gives a really good context to move forward with.
Thank you. One thing I wanted to know if you can expound on, Drew, is the ability to capture some of the non-transit projects, such as sidewalks or road intersection improvements that can be made as part of this referendum.
Absolutely. Beyond the last slide, so I ended here. I will jump to here because I think this demonstrates, this is very technical, so this is not a planning framework. I think the better planning framework are those three that we laid out of connectivity to activity centers, serving the community, activity within activity centers. However, we have some legal realities of the way that the law is written related to House Bill 930. And so as we think about what's then eligible, because what we heard from the board is look at that entire ecosystem of what transportation needs there are. And then what we would like to request the board's permission for at a future agenda is permission to move into the specific planning process for 930. And then as we think about projects in just broad categories, they really fall into one of three. They're a transit project, and those are pretty easy to identify, or a non-transit project. And then we have this area in between of transit supportive projects that can provide last mile connectivity, that may grade separate an intersection that provides for a faster high capacity, a faster BRT route, or overall corridor beautification and illumination for a transit corridor.
Okay.
So I would suggest that the next steps would be taking those three categories and filling them out with the specific projects that the board, the community, and the cities would like to see within those in terms of the full respect of and the full universe of transportation projects, and then coming through there and then very clearly identifying in terms of eligibility to put in the referendum, what is a transit project, what is a transit supportive project?
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Burrow.
Drew, the managed lanes have made a tremendous impact for traffic in a positive way.
Absolutely.
For 75 and 575. But I know buses can go in the managed lanes at no charge. Would BRT, would the guide rails would they be able to access the managed lanes if we went with BRT?
They could, they certainly could, and there are some commuter routes that look to take advantage of that. The particular challenge with the express lanes, and I completely agree, that they've been one of the most transformational transportation improvements in the state in years and years and years. But the challenge is they are unidirectional, so they do not serve the reverse commute. And what we're seeing over the years is more and more folks are wanting to, say, live in Midtown and then commute back to Cumberland, or live in Cumberland and commute up to Town Center and so on and so forth. With just the way that they're structured of being reversible lanes, at any given point, we can only serve a single direction of travel, and then they take a couple hours in order to completely reverse those, because they've got to start at the top of the system, work all the way down to then be able to turn the system around. So that challenge exists on 75 and 575 will not exist on 285 because the plan there is to build 2 lanes in either direction from 20 all the way around to 20. So we won't have some of those same constraints on 285.
But they do a good job with traffic coming into town and going out, like 75 north in the afternoon is when going north is when you need the managed lanes, and that's when they're open in the northern direction.
Absolutely.
But I understand what you're saying. And also I heard that it is Mayor Norton's birthday today.
Is that true? Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thanks for joining
He wants
us.
us to sing. He's got a voice.
Richardson.
Okay, she could sing to you later. Happy birthday, Mayor.
Are there any other questions of commissioners? So again, Drew, you were looking for next steps. Can you help clarify what specifically you're looking for?
Absolutely. It shows a little bit here, but just most importantly is to keep the conversation moving. We do need authorization to really begin in earnest the conversation and the planning for a referendum in 2024. Okay. And as we've talked about this internally, we did meet with TAB yesterday. To put a finer point on it, really we're looking to close a few doors. Right now, if we think of the universe of options that still exist, it's everywhere from a MARTA Act through House Bill 170 and everything in between. And what would be most helpful to us is to have very clarity from the board about that. And so then we would propose coming out of this conversation, again, assuming that these 2 categories being the priority for the board, we would seek authorization to begin planning for that referendum, respective of this planning framework that we've laid out today. That would allow us to begin those conversations with cities, with key community partners and stakeholders, the public in general, continue the conversation with the board, and open to any comments and consensus that exist around that.
Okay, so a couple of things. You mentioned you spoke with the Transit Advisory Board. Did they provide feedback with respect to your presentation?
They did. They provided a resolution that I don't have with me, but I know Matt is here today. Their general consensus was that we're on the right path, that additional conversation is needed. I will provide a copy of the resolution. They did have some action that was generally along the lines of, we see where the department's going and encourage the board to continue to take the next steps for planning of a 24 referendum.
Great. That's good to know that there's some support that's coming from our citizen appointees, and it'd be helpful to see that resolution.
Absolutely.
Also, help me understand what would signify consensus for you to move forward.
The two different paths that we lay out here today, really the action that is most critical is authorized referendum planning.
Okay.
So that would come in the form of just a simple agenda item that we can draft up and send around to the board, authorizing staff to begin planning for a 9:30 referendum, and then it would be a question to the board if there is a desire to do some kind of a policy addendum in the short term, or to allow that planning to take shape and to allow the community to shape what that policy addendum may be.
Okay, so the 8th is a BOC meeting, the 17th is not. Are you looking for there to be?
17th is.
Okay.
I moved it for Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I'm looking at my calendar in front of me.
It's
Thank you,
yeah,
Commissioners.
okay.
Our Thursday is a BOC meeting. That's our last BOC meeting before Thanksgiving.
That's right.
So are you looking at us taking action on the 17th?
Yes.
Okay.
Either of those would work for us.
Okay.
But the 8th is CTP policy addendum? What, is that a separate vote?
Yes, is it a separate or even necessary? So this was something we tried to move forward last year, and there just was not general consensus of the board. I don't think that barred us from moving forward, even though it was desired to have some type of goal or policy statement from the board. Because of the response to that last year, I certainly don't want this effort to be limited, because I believe if we continue to meet with stakeholders as we have been, I think out of those discussions, a policy statement may naturally flow from those conversations. However, if there is some consensus that can be reached by the 8th, I would, certainly don't want to bar that from coming on our agenda. Again, I just don't want that to be a limitation.
Of course.
Can we do them both on the 17th? Or do we have to do one first?
We could.
Please ask Drew on the mic so he can hear you. Yes.
We could do it on the same agenda. We just left some time in between because they are related but separate questions, but there would be no problem from the department to bring both forward at the same time.
Okay.
And largely the policy, at least that we were suggesting, and ultimately policy is responsibility of the board, but the policy we were suggesting is, again, to really build on the pillars of the three items that we spoke about today, knowing that there's a number of different modes. There's a lot of the how it's done, but ultimately anything that we want to do for a safe, effective, connected transportation system throughout the county is going to fall into those three categories.
Commissioner Gambrill, please.
So really, the only difference between Path 1 and Path 2 is a CTP policy addendum. That's really the only difference between the Path 1 and Path 2. By going to Path 2, essentially to authorize the referendum planning, we give Drew 10 days earlier start on this process without having to do a policy addendum.
That is correct, Commissioner. It would expedite this process.
It would.
Whether we do the policy addendum or not, which I'm fine if doing one, as long as it's, like I said, representative of the board and the cities. I think having both on the 17th would be preferred. I would like to have the time to speak with all of my constituents about this presentation, answer any questions as well, and having the 17th would give me the time to do that.
Absolutely.
Just again, note that the CTP is all-encompassing of transportation, not just transit. So again, I can see the opportunity, but I can also see the challenge in us limiting this based on that broader statement. Again, looking at where we were, if things have changed since that time, I certainly would be delighted and would like to know, but I would just share by the 17th, we've got to be ready to move forward should that policy addendum not be ready by the 8th.
Of course.
Yeah. And I prefer for us not to conflate the two, because that's what we tried to do last time, and it kept this from moving forward. So I would ask that they be separate.
Of course.
Okay. Are there any other observations or questions for Drew? Drew, again, thank you. Appreciate your time. Appreciate our mayors for taking the time to be here and all the discussions that we've had for how this moves forward. And again, appreciate the tab. Matt, thank you for being here. And our citizen stakeholders, thank you for being here. Our city manager of Kennesaw, thank you for being here. And look forward to seeing how this moves forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.